The first political parties. Unlike a faction, which exists in order to achieve a single goal, a political party endures beyond the accomplishment of one specific goal. So, people may have split into factions over one particular issue or over accomplishing one single goal. But people split into political parties, and there were a lot of issues or a lot of goals that these people wanted to achieve, or a lot of beliefs that they all believed in. And so the political parties were going to endure longer than just long enough to accomplish a single goal. Now, the first two political parties in the United States were the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. So first, let's look at the Federalists. Hamilton is the primary figure associated with Federalists, who were wealthy Northeasterners in support of a strong central government and a loose interpretation of the Constitution. The Federalists advocated a strong president, the economic policies of Alexander Hamilton, and a strong relationship with the British. In general, Federalists tended to appeal to businessmen. So, the Federalists were somewhat led by Alexander Hamilton. He was at least a primary figure associated with federalism because a lot of the things that people believed for out of it were things that Hamilton believed in, or, like the economic policies, things that Hamilton created. Federalists tended to be wealthy and from the northeastern part of the United States. They supported a strong central government, a strong president. They liked having the central government have a lot of power, and a loose interpretation of the Constitution. So that meant that instead of sticking literally with everything on there, they opened up parts of it that were vague to more interpretation, which would again give the central government more power. They also favored a strong relationship with the British. They liked the dependability of the British, the fact that they had been established for a long time. Everything with them seemed pretty stable, and so they wanted that stability of having a strong tie with Britain. And they also tended to appeal to businessmen. A lot of businessmen were going to like the idea of having a strong central government. They were going to be wealthier. They were going to like the economic policies that Hamilton had put into place because they were going to be, in general, better for businesses who would be taking out loans and trying to make a profit, which was part of Hamilton's economic policy. He wanted to be able to lend out money to make more money in the future and keep the economy booming. So those are some important parts to remember about federalism. Now, the Democratic Republicans were associated with the common man of the South and West. So the members of the Democratic Republican Party were not generally going to be wealthy. They were led by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. They advocated a weaker central government. They, of course, knew that there needed to be some power in the central government, but they wanted it to be weaker. They didn't like the idea that one part of the government could become stronger than the rest, and they didn't want to end up with a tyrannical ruler like they had in Britain before they broke away in the American Revolution. So they were trying to avoid repeating that in the future. They liked to keep the government weaker. They advocated a strict interpretation of the Constitution, a close relationship with France, and closely restricted government spending. Democratic Republicans mostly appealed to farmers and planters. So, they were associated with the common man. They weren't as wealthy. Democratic Republicans were led by Jefferson and Madison. They advocated the weaker central government, which also meant they advocated a strict interpretation of the Constitution. If it was interpreted very strictly, that was going to give less room for interpretation and therefore less power to the central government. They favored a close relationship with France. They liked that the French had just had a revolution, the United States had just had a revolution, and they admired that in France, and they wanted to connect more with France, where the Federalists wanted to connect more with Britain. And they advocated closely restricted government spending, where Hamilton's economic policies favored giving out money in order to get money back in. The Democratic Republicans wanted to just hold on to the money and spend very little to try to pay off their debts. They didn't like the spending to make money. They wanted to hang on to all their money and closely restrict government spending. And Democratic Republicans mostly appealed to farmers and planters. These people were going to generally not be as wealthy. They were going to identify with this group of people more than they would with the wealthy businessmen. So the first two political parties were the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. Federalists were primarily wealthy and favored a strong central government, a loose interpretation of the Constitution. They wanted to have a stronger relationship with Britain, and they appealed to businessmen. The Democratic Republicans were associated with the common man. They weren't as wealthy. They were led by Jefferson and Madison. They wanted a weaker central government, a strict interpretation of the Constitution. They wanted to restrict government spending, and they wanted there to be a closer relationship with France, and mostly farmers and planters were the ones who were drawn to Democratic Republicans.
To find out more about how to ace your test and get more practice for your test, click the study guide. Learn why Mometrix is the best and smartest decision you could make for your test prep choice. We have done all the work cutting through the fluff to give you what you need to perform well on your exam. Click the study guide to get started now. And thank you for watching and learning with us.